Good morning, Ayin Beis, Volume 3. We are on page, close to the bottom of page 1425.
Good morning, Rabbi.
This is continuing the discussion that began much earlier, that the Neshamas Yisrael are compared to the pupil of God's eye. Ishin Eine is the pasuk in Hazinu, where he first did that on the bottom, close to the bottom of page 1408. And the context I should have mentioned, I'll mention now, is remember, all the way in the beginning, when he first began discussing Torah on page 1350, that we're talking about the interface, which is Torah, not via Daita Hayim, which is more Mamata Lamaila, as explained earlier in volume 2. So when he began discussing how Torah impacts the Torah draws down the divine into existence, the transcendent divine. So he began on page 1352. He said, "V'nidali levayda inyan." We'll understand the inyan with what about the inyan of Hariyah, based on a mimer of the Alter Rebbe, "Ve'nenu me'iris kishemesh u'kiyireach." So he explains it all with the vision of the eye, with eyesight. And that became a very prominent example that has really been the undercurrent of the themes going from there, 1352, through all these pages. And it will continue to go almost to the end of the Hemshech. It's going to keep coming back to it. So I just want to make sure that that's emphasized here. And Eir to understand that, he compared it to two other types of light, moonlight and the luminous stone. 3 types of Eir Makabel. All of them need something else in order for them to be able to illuminate. But they're very different as well. But the real operative, the most important example is Eir Hariyah, eyesight. And in eyesight itself, he's been explaining 2 levels. The way the eye, the way the vision is in our physical eye, where we have limitations. You can't see in the dark. You need a light to shine for you to be able to see. You can only see that far. And then there's Etzem Koyach Hariyah, the core of the power of vision, and that doesn't have any such limits. And he said the Neshamas are both levels. The Neshamas, as they come down below, they need Eir HaTorah, they need the light of Torah to guide and direct them. So that's how the power of vision is in the eye, and it needs an external light, a siyua, he called it, a support, a help, assistance. The Neshamas, as they are in their root, are higher than Torah, and they're actually mashpi in Torah. They're like etzem koyach hariyah. They don't need an outside force. They themselves are connected to the very core of the power of vision. That's been part of the central theme that he's been discussing. He also talked about the other 2, the moon and the moonlight, which also reflects and needs the sun, and a luminous stone, a shining stone that also comes from the sun and the stars, as he explained. And he explained the difference between Mishnah, Mikra, Mishnah, and Talmud compares to these 3 different examples. But coming back, Ishin Eine is the higher level of the souls as they're rooted in the pupil of the divine eye. Ishin Eine, the pupil of his eye. So that's where this is in the discussion, and that's why the Neshamas have the power to access the Etzem, which in turn draws down into Ishtalshus, like we've been learning through Meirich Be'echad, the power to unify the highest levels, unify existence with the highest levels of the divine, draw it down, Amin Yesh Meirabah B'chol Keche, with all power and kavanah, as we've learned, and create this interface. However, as I explained yesterday, and I'll reiterate, this doesn't happen automatically. That doesn't mean the Neshamas, even though they have this tremendous power, something has to activate it in them. Because when the Neshama comes down below, it gets concealed. Even though we learn the entire Torah in our mother's womb, but once we're born, we forget. We were told to, we are made to forget consciously. So even the Neshama, as it's rooted in the highest levels, does come down into a body, and it needs help. So we have Torah. And we're also going to be explaining now why we also have the Malachim. So we do have help. Say there is also angels, forces that help us discover our inner power so we can draw from these highest levels. So as much as the souls are higher than Malachim, because Malachim are called Einei Hashem, the eyes of God, and supervise the governance of existence, whereas Neshamas, as we said, is Ishen Einei, the pupil of the eye, which is higher than existence, the core. Yet, as we learned, Hagam Shen Yisrael B'chinas Ishen Einei Shelamayla Harba Malachim, which are called Einei Hashem, B'kol Mokim Yashmael. Nevertheless, there's a quality, a virtue. Also, Gamkim Malachim Neshamas Yisrael Makablim B'hem, and the souls receive from them. So we're in the middle of discussing what is it that the angels do to help support our work below to be able to draw all these levels. So now back how the eye actually needs support from outside in order to be able to see. The eye as it manifests in the vision as it manifests in the eye, or the soul as it manifests in existence. So he began by explaining the base of the pasuk, Haben Yakeli Ephraim, is my child precious to me, dear? And that's why that Meya he could refer to as the innards, because if my innards, that's why I have compassion over him. So now we're understanding what is Meya, the kirbayim, like he said, which in the physical term is translated as the intestines, the innards, the stomach. So he's explaining that in Ruchnius, this refers to Malachim. Malachim refer to Me'ai v'kirve, the kirbi. And he brought from the Zohar, Man kirbi ilin shar chiyun bara, the ikrin kirbayim. So Malachim are called kirbayim, the innards. And bara that he created, because it's the world of Bria. And he brought from the Pardes, I'm summing up what we learned yesterday. The Pardes says this goes on the Chayas HaKodesh. And why they call Chiyun Bara? Because they're outside of Atzilus. So the Atzilus is a world, a divine world. The angels, these Chayas HaKodesh, are on the other side of the partition of Atzilus and Bria, and that's why they're called Chayim Bara. In the parentheses, the Rebbe Rashab elaborated that there's two levels of Chayis. Chayin Ilan, which is the Midas of Atzilus, that's the Ovis, the Merkava in Atzilus. And Chayin Taton, that's the four camps of the Shechina. That's the Shvatim, the lower Merkava, the lower chariot. So one's in Atzilus, one is on the other side of the curtain of the partition, and that's Biyah. The Pareches is the partition between Atzilus and Biyah. And Bria. And he said in Zohar Bereshis, which was cited much earlier in volume 2, which I cited yesterday, he says this is Kamei Krema, this is like the membrane or the diaphragm that separates between the Chotzer HaKoved, that separates between the lungs and the intestines. And the Rakia and the Pas is the partition between them. And yes, I remember I wondered what Mem Tas was, Tem Tov, is Mayim Tachtenim. Because that Rakia, that partition separates between the higher waters and the lower waters. Or you could say Mem Tas Tov is Merkofta Tata. I was thinking maybe it's Merkofta Tata, because he said there was Merkove law and Merkofta Tata. When the Zohar does talk about Mayim Tachtenim, so you could say both. Actually, when I think about it, I think he means Markafta Tata. The Maimer, V'noshe Begay, is actually a Maimer Veschanan from the Samach Tzedek that he refers to. The Neda Tere Veschanan, he talks about this more at length. That's where I saw this, the details. So bottom line is that the angels refer to the innards, and they're on this side of the parsa, like the diaphragm that separates between the organs, the lungs and the intestines. And that's what they're called the intestines. Because they're mevadim. And elsewhere he says it's actually in Atzilus, in the lower level of Atzilus. I believe in this Eira Teira Veschan, he brings that interpretation as well. Because they're mevadim. What do the intestines do? What do the innards do? They separate the nutrients from the waste. They process the food. We'll soon learn what that means in Ruchnius, what the angels do and why they're so necessary and what they do for neshamas. So they process. So why they call, another reason why they call kirbayim, which is from the word karev, says the Pardes, because they're karev, they're close to Atzilus. So even though Bria is outside of Atzilus, but it's close. It's right outside the door, so to speak, right outside the curtain. And the Rebbe Rashab explains, because Bria is connected with, close to and connects him with Atzilus, like the Yud and the Hey of Bina, which dwells, which dominates, and that's in Bria, is connected to the Yud of Chachma of Atzilus. Today, they like two friends, like two close neighbors. And he brings from the Migdash Melech and the Ramaz that says that when we talk about Umisham Yepored, that after there was one river, Nar Yotzim Eden, a river left Eden, and then Misham Yepored into four rivers, Yepored is from the word Pirud, that separation happens primarily in Yetzirah, but not Bebriya. Because in Bria, Bina is closer to Chochmah, and therefore the Pirud actually happens in the world of Yetzirah. So what do we see from this? That the Chayes HaKedesh, or what he called Chayin Iloin, Chayin Tatoin rather, Chayin Bora. On one hand, they're outside of Atzilus, but they're close to Atzilus. And yet Bria is still outside of Atzilus. That's why there radiates Bina, not Chochmah. However, in a concealed way, within the Bina, there's Chochmah. That's where we stopped. So he's established that the level, and we see from the Pasuk, Yaakov Li'Ephraim, Haben Yaakov Li'Ephraim, is referring to Neshamas, to my child, but they need the support of the Mayim